Blood on a wedding dress dries into the exact shade of rust. That's something nobody tells you when you're dress shopping. Rain drummed against the tinted windows of the armored Audi, masking the sirens screaming down the avenue. Sitting there, shivering in $3,000 of ruined silk, shivering next to a man who had a loaded Glock casually resting on his thigh, regret wasn't what choked me. It was relief. Insane, stupid relief. Welcome to my wedding day. The bridal suite of the St. Regis smelled like aerosol hairspray, wilted white lilies, and impending doom. I sat on the edge of a velvet chaise lounge, staring blankly at the wall. The corset of my Vera Wang gown felt less like a garment and more like an orthopedic brace, digging bruised trenches into my lower ribs with every shallow breath. Outside the heavy mahogany doors, a string quartet was warming up, the discordant scraping of horsehair on cello strings setting my teeth on edge. In 30 minutes, I was supposed to walk down an aisle blanketed in imported orchids and legally bind myself to Declan Hayes. Declan, the golden boy of the city's political elite. Safe, handsome, predictable. Or so I had spent the last 2 years convincing myself. I needed water. My mouth tasted like copper and stale mints. I hauled myself up, the 50 yards of silk and tulle rustling like dry leaves, and moved toward the adjoining private bathroom. The thick carpet absorbed my footsteps. The bathroom door was ajar, just a crack, letting out a sliver of harsh, fluorescent light. I reached for the brass handle, my fingers brushing the cool metal, when Declan's voice drifted through the gap. He wasn't using his public speaking voice, the warm, honeyed baritone that charmed donors and pacified my anxious mother. He was using his real voice, the flat, nasal one. I don't care what the polling says, Martin. The optics are fine. A pause. A lighter flicked, followed by the soft hiss of an exhaled breath. She's docile. That's the entire point. The board doesn't want a firebrand. They want a golden retriever in a pencil skirt. Once the papers are signed and the trust is merged, she can spend her days redecorating the townhouse. She won't ask questions. My hand froze on the brass knob. The chill of the metal seeped into my bones. Of course I handled the prenup, Declan continued, his tone dripping with bored condescension. Her father was desperate for the cash injection to save his sinking firm. She's completely dependent. It's an acquisition, Martin. Nothing more. Yeah, see you out there. The phone clicked shut. I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. The expected cinematic wave of devastation never arrived. Instead, a bizarre, frigid clarity washed over me. The nausea that had been brewing in my stomach for 6 months, the instinct I had repeatedly smothered with logic and wedding cake tastings, crystallized into a single, undeniable truth. I wasn't a bride. I was a hostage with a good dental plan. I backed away from the door. My reflection caught in the full-length mirror near the vanity. I looked ridiculous. A frosted cupcake of a human being, caked in foundation. My hair pinned into an architectural nightmare that gave me a low-grade migraine. I reached up and began pulling the pearl-tipped pins from my hair. They clattered against the marble vanity. Then I slid the 3-carat diamond engagement ring off my finger. It felt heavy, cold, and entirely foreign. I set it next to the sink. I didn't take the main hall. I took the service elevator. The descent was agonizingly slow. The elevator smelled faintly of floor wax and stale cigarette smoke. When the doors finally chimed and parted, I stepped out into the cavernous, chaotic heat of the hotel's subterranean catering kitchen. The shift in temperature was a violent assault. The air was thick with the scent of searing tenderloin, rosemary, and the sharp chemical tang of industrial dishwasher fluid. A line cook balancing a massive tray of champagne flutes stopped dead in his tracks, his jaw slacking as I swept past him. "Hey! Lady, you can't be back here!" someone yelled over the deafening hum of the ventilation hoods. I didn't stop. The floor was a treacherous slick of grease and water, and my satin heels offered no traction. I kicked them off without breaking stride, the wet, gritty quarry tile biting into my bare soles. The heavy tool of my skirt caught on the corner of a stainless steel prep table, tearing with a loud, satisfying rip. I yanked it free, leaving a jagged strip of white silk dangling from the metal. I slammed my weight against the heavy steel push bar of the loading dock doors. They gave way with a metallic groan, and I spilled out into the alley. The rain hit me like a physical blow. It was a torrential, unforgiving downpour, the kind that turns the city's potholes into black mirrors and washes the smell of wet garbage up from the gutters. The cold was immediate, shocking the breath from my lungs. Within seconds, my hair was plastered to my skull, and the heavy layers of my dress soaked up the water, dragging me down like lead weights. I ran. I didn't know where. I just knew I had to get away from the St. Regis, away from the string quartet, away from Declan's flat, nasal voice. I splashed through a deep puddle, the freezing water splashing up to my thighs. My chest heaved against the unforgiving corset. Panic, sharp and metallic, began to claw at my throat. I had no phone, no purse, no shoes, just a ruined dress and a terrifying expanse of grey city blocks ahead of me. At the end of the alley, a massive black Audi SUV sat idling, its hazard lights blinking rhythmically, casting sickly yellow shadows against the wet brick walls. A man in a dark suit was standing outside the passenger door, smoking a cigarette under an umbrella. He looked nervous, his head swiveling left and right. I didn't think. Instinct, raw and unpolished, propelled me forward. I lunged toward the vehicle just as the distant, rising wail of police sirens cut through the sound of the rain. The man outside the Audi dropped his cigarette as I staggered out of the gloom. He reached inside his jacket, a fluid, practiced motion that immediately registered as a threat, even through my panic. "Whoa, hey! Back off, lady!" he barked, stepping directly into my path. He smelled of cheap cologne and wet wool. "Please," I gasped, my voice cracking. The cold was making my teeth chatter so violently I could barely form the words. I just need to get out of here. Please!" The sirens were getting louder, echoing off the high-rises. "Beat it!" the man snarled, shoving a heavy hand against my shoulder. I stumbled backward, my bare feet slipping on the slick pavement. My knee slammed into the asphalt, tearing the top layer of skin. The sting was sharp, cutting through the numbness. I looked up, desperate, ready to beg. The back window of the Audi rolled down with a soft, electronic hum. Just a few inches. "Leo," a voice rasped from the dark interior. It wasn't loud, but it possessed a dense, vibrating authority that instantly cut through the noise of the storm. "Put her in the car." The man, Leo, hesitated, shooting a panicked glance down the street where the flashing red and blue lights were now bleeding through the rain. "Boss, she's a civilian. We don't got time." "The cops are locking down the block, Leo. A guy in an alley looks like a suspect. A guy with a runaway bride looks like a bad rom-com. Put her in the goddamn car." Leo swore under his breath, grabbed my arm with bruising force, and yanked me off the pavement. He wrenched the heavy rear door open and practically threw me inside. I scrambled across the leather seats, pulling the massive, soaking wet bulk of my dress with me. The door slammed shut behind me, sealing me in a vacuum of silence. The ambient noise of the city vanished, replaced by the low, powerful thrum of the engine and the sound of my own ragged breathing. The interior smelled like ozone, expensive leather, and something metallic. Copper. Blood. I pressed myself against the far door, my chest heaving, and finally looked at the man sitting next to me. He didn't look like a savior. He sat completely still in the shadows, his head resting back against the headrest. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit, but the tie was gone, and the collar of his white shirt was undone. His face was a landscape of sharp, unforgiving angles, currently marred by a swollen jaw and a cut above his left eyebrow that was bleeding sluggishly down his temple. His dark hair was damp, plastered against his forehead. He didn't look at me. He was staring straight ahead, his jaw tight. One of his hands rested loosely on his thigh. His knuckles were raw, split open, the skin scraped away to reveal angry red tissue. Nestled casually beneath that hand, resting on the seat between us, was a black handgun. My breath caught in my throat. I recognized him. Not personally, but from the grainy, aggressively cropped photos the local news loved to cycle through every time the city's docks experienced a logistical anomaly. Gabriel Costa. The engine roared as Leo threw the car into drive. We peeled out of the alley just as 2 patrol cars skidded past the entrance, their sirens deafening even through the reinforced glass. "Breathe," Gabriel said. His voice was low, scraping like sandpaper over wood. I realized I was hyperventilating. The edges of my vision were going dark, a static-filled tunnel closing in on me. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing myself to take a slow, agonizing breath against the constriction of the corset. "You're getting mud on the upholstery," he observed mildly. I snapped my eyes open, staring at him. He had turned his head slightly, finally looking at me. His eyes were the color of black coffee, flat and unreadable. There was no pity in them. No curiosity, just a cold, calculating assessment. "I'm sorry," I managed to whisper, my voice shaking. I tried to gather the ruined folds of my dress closer to my body, but it was useless. I was a swamp creature in a bridal gown. I can get out at the next corner." "No, you can't," he replied, turning his gaze back to the window. Leo blew a red light back there. "We have a tail." I looked out the back window. 2 blocks back, a police cruiser was making a sharp U-turn, its lights flashing angrily in the rain. "They're after you," I realized, the absurdity of the situation finally piercing through the shock. I had run from a toxic marriage straight into a getaway car. Gabriel let out a short, breathy sound that might have been a laugh if it weren't so devoid of humor. "Astute observation. What are they after you for? You rob a bakery?" He gestured vaguely at my dress. "I didn't rob anyone. I left my fiancée." "At the altar?" "In the bathroom." He paused, finally turning his head to look at me fully. The streetlight swept across his battered face, highlighting the exhaustion carved deep into the lines around his mouth. "You left him in the bathroom?" "No, I was in the bathroom. He was outside." I rubbed my bare, shivering arms, the cold of the air conditioning biting into my wet skin. "He didn't know I heard him." Gabriel watched me for a long moment. He reached forward and cranked the heating dial up. A blast of warm air flooded the back seat. "Well," Gabriel muttered, picking up the gun and casually sliding it into the shoulder holster, hidden beneath his jacket. "Congratulations on your newly acquired freedom. Try not to bleed on my seats." I looked down. My knee, the one I had scraped on the asphalt, was steadily dripping blood onto the pristine cream leather of the Audi. I didn't say anything. I just watched the blood mix with the dirty rainwater, forming a pale, rusty puddle. We drove for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 40 minutes. The chaotic neon smear of the inner city gradually gave way to the bleak, sodium-lit emptiness of the industrial district. The police tail had vanished 20 minutes ago, lost in a maze of narrow side streets and Leo's aggressive, stomach-churning, evasive maneuvers. I had stopped shivering, which I knew from a high school biology class was actually a bad sign. My body was giving up on generating heat. The wet dress felt like a casing of ice. The Audi finally slowed, turning down a dead-end street lined with windowless corrugated metal warehouses. We pulled up to a massive, rust-stained garage door. Leo flashed the headlights twice. A moment later, the door rattled upward with a deafening metallic screech. We rolled into the dark cavern. As soon as the rear bumper cleared the threshold, the door slammed shut behind us, plunging the space into pitch blackness before the harsh overhead fluorescent lights flickered violently to life. The space smelled aggressively of motor oil, damp concrete, and stale cigarette smoke. Stripped-down car chassis sat on cinder blocks, casting long, skeletal shadows. "Clear out, Leo," Gabriel said, popping his door open. The interior lights illuminated his face again. The bleeding had stopped, but the bruising around his jaw had deepened into an ugly purple. "Take the car to the lockup in Queens. Get it detailed. I want it back by noon tomorrow." "You sure you don't want me to stick around, boss?" Leo asked, eyeing me in the rearview mirror with overt hostility. "I don't like leaving you with a random." "I'll survive the bride, Leo. Go." Gabriel stepped out of the car. He didn't wait to see if I was following. I struggled with the heavy door, my frozen fingers slipping on the handle. I practically fell out of the vehicle, my bare feet hitting the grease-stained concrete with a wet slap. The cold of the floor shot straight up my legs. I grabbed the door frame to steady myself, my joints aching in protest. Leo didn't waste a second. He slammed the car into reverse, tires squealing on the concrete, and backed out as the garage door briefly opened to let him loose. The silence he left behind was heavy and oppressive. Gabriel was walking toward a small, glass-enclosed office in the corner of the garage. He pushed the door open and flipped a light switch. Inside was a battered leather couch, a metal desk covered in paperwork, and a small industrial sink. He tossed his suit jacket over the back of a chair, wincing as the movement pulled at his ribs. He turned on the faucet, leaned over the sink, and began splashing cold water on his face. The water running down the drain turned a faint, muddy pink. I stood awkwardly in the doorway, a drenched, shivering ghost holding 10 pounds of ruined silk. Gabriel grabbed a stained shop towel, dried his face, and finally looked at me. He let out a long, heavy sigh, the sound of a man who was thoroughly out of patience. "There's a landline on the desk," he said, gesturing with the towel. "Call a cab. Call a friend. Call your jilted groom. I don't care. Just get out of here before my associates arrive." I looked at the black rotary phone sitting on the clutter. I didn't move toward it. "I don't have anyone to call," I said. My voice sounded hollow in the small room. Gabriel stopped wiping his hands. He frowned, the cut above his brow crinkling. "What do you mean, you don't have anyone? You were getting married an hour ago. You must have bridesmaids, parents." "My father's business was saved by Declan's family," I said flatly, the words tasting like ash. "If I call him, he'll put me in a car and drive me back to the hotel himself. My bridesmaids were Declan's sisters. I have a checking account, but it's joint. My phone is in the bridal suite." Gabriel stared at me. He tossed the towel onto the desk. "So you're broke, freezing, and functionally homeless." "Yes," he ran a hand through his damp hair, tugging at the roots. "Jesus Christ, I run a syndicate, not a halfway house. You can't stay here." "I know," I whispered. The adrenaline was entirely gone now. leaving behind a crushing, bone-deep exhaustion. My knees suddenly buckled. I caught myself on the doorframe, but I slid down it, ending up in a pathetic heap on the dirty linoleum floor. Gabriel didn't rush over to help me. He just watched me fall, his expression hardening. "Stand up," he commanded. "I can't," I mumbled. "The dress, it's too heavy. I'm so cold." A heavy silence stretched between us, broken only by the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. Then I heard the scrape of a chair. Gabriel's heavy footsteps approached. He stopped in front of me, his scuffed leather dress shoes inches from my muddy, bare feet. He crouched down, bringing his face level with mine. Up close, he smelled of rain and peppermint gum. "If you die of hypothermia in my office, I'm going to be extremely irritated," he said, his voice dropping its sharp edge, settling into a low rumble. He reached out and grasped my upper arms. His hands were warm, painfully warm against my frozen skin. He hauled me up with terrifying ease, practically lifting me off my feet, and deposited me onto the battered leather couch. The springs groaned in protest. "Take the dress off," he said, turning his back to me and walking over to a set of metal lockers against the wall. I blinked at his broad back, my brain moving sluggishly. "What?" "Take it off," he repeated, yanking a locker open. "It's soaking wet. You're shivering so hard your teeth are going to crack." I reached back, my numb fingers fumbling uselessly against the row of tiny, impossible silk-covered buttons that ran from the nape of my neck down to the base of my spine. It had taken 2 bridesmaids 20 minutes to fasten them. I couldn't even feel the fabric. "I can't," I said, a humiliating tear of sheer frustration escaping my eye and tracking hotly down my cold cheek. "I can't reach the buttons." Gabriel paused. He closed the locker with a dull clang, holding a folded grey t-shirt and a pair of dark sweatpants. He turned around, his eyes locking onto mine. I saw the hesitation in his posture, the stark reluctance to cross the physical distance between us. We were 2 strangers drowning in our own respective disasters. He walked over slowly, tossing the clothes onto the desk. "Turn around," he said quietly. I shifted on the couch, presenting my back to him. I felt the heat of his body before he even touched me. Then, his fingers, rough and calloused, brushed against my spine. I flinched. "Hold still," he murmured. He started at the top. His movements were slow, meticulous, and entirely devoid of anything sexual. It was a mechanical extraction. The brush of his knuckles against my frozen skin sent a confusing shock wave through my nervous system. Unbuttoning a wedding dress is supposed to be an act of intimate celebration, performed by a new husband in the warm glow of a honeymoon suite. Instead, it was happening in a grease-stained garage, performed by a battered, bleeding mob boss who wanted nothing to do with me. "Who was the guy?" Gabriel asked, his voice low, focused on the task. "Declan Hayes," I answered, my voice small. His hands paused for a fraction of a second on the middle button. "The city councilman." "Yes." "He's a snake," Gabriel said bluntly, resuming his work. "He takes kickbacks from the waterfront developers while preaching about affordable housing. You dodged a bullet." "I think I just stepped in front of a different one," I noted dryly. Gabriel let out another of those breathy, humorless chuckles. "Probably." He undid the last button at the base of my spine. "Done." He took a step back, giving me space. I stood up, grabbing the heavy, ruined bodice of the Vera Wang gown, and pushed it down. The soaked silk and heavy tulle pooled around my feet, leaving me standing in just a thin, flesh-colored slip. It offered zero warmth, but the relief of losing the suffocating corset was immediate. I took my first full, deep breath in 8 hours. Gabriel didn't look away, but his gaze wasn't predatory. He looked at me the way one looks at a stray dog, assessing the damage, calculating the inconvenience. He picked up the grey t-shirt from the desk and tossed it at me. It hit me in the chest. "Put that on. There's a space heater under the desk." He walked over to his own suit jacket, checking the magazine of his spare clip before sliding it into his pocket. "You've got 3 hours to figure out your next move. Then I have a meeting, and you have to be gone." The grey t-shirt smelled like cheap laundry powder and something metallic, like keys left in a pocket. It hung past my mid-thigh, the thick cotton rough against my cold skin. I pulled the drawstring of the sweatpants tight, rolling the waistband 3 times just to keep them from sliding off my hips. I crouched under the metal desk, pressing my bare feet as close to the rattling space heater as I dared. The glowing orange coils baked the dampness from my shins, filling the small office with the distinct, acrid scent of burning dust. Beside the desk, the discarded pile of my Vera Wang gown sat on the floor like a dead, deflated swan. Gabriel had ignored me for the last 20 minutes. He sat in the swivel chair on the opposite side of the room, positioned directly under the harsh fluorescent glare. A bottle of rubbing alcohol, a roll of gauze, and a pair of trauma shears rested on a small metal filing cabinet next to him. He had stripped off his dress shirt, revealing a torso mapped with pale, jagged scars that spoke of a history I didn't want to think about. A sprawling, intricate tattoo of a serpent coiled around a dagger covered his left shoulder. The ink faded and bruised. He unscrewed the cap of the rubbing alcohol. He didn't bother with a cotton pad. He just tipped the plastic bottle and poured the clear liquid directly over his split knuckles. He didn't wince. The only indication that he felt anything at all was the sudden, sharp clench of his jaw, the muscle ticking rhythmically beneath his skin. I watched the blood and alcohol drip onto the concrete floor, the sharp, sterile smell cut through the heavy scent of motor oil. "You're going to get an infection doing it like that," I said. My voice was raspy, dry from the heat of the coil. Gabriel paused, the bottle suspended in his hand. He looked over his shoulder at me, his dark eyes flat. "Are you a doctor now, Chloe?" He knew my name. Of course he did. My engagement to Declan had been plastered across the society pages for months. Chloe Bishop, daughter of real estate magnate Thomas Bishop, to wed Councilman Declan Hayes. "No," I replied, pulling my knees to my chest. "But I know pouring harsh solvents directly into an open wound damages the healthy tissue along with the bacteria. It delays healing." He stared at me for a long, heavy moment. Then he set the bottle down with a loud clack. "Fascinating. Come here, then." I froze. "What?" "You're taking up space and burning my oxygen," he said, his tone devoid of inflection. "If you're going to sit there and critique my first aid, you can make yourself useful. Come here." My heart gave a dull, uneven thump. Every survival instinct I possessed screamed at me to stay under the desk, to keep the flimsy barrier of the heater between me and the man who orchestrated dockyard extortion for a living. But another, deeper instinct, the one that had propelled me out of the hotel, told me that cowering wouldn't keep me safe. I crawled out from under the desk. The linoleum was freezing beneath my bare soles. I crossed the small room, stopping an arm's length from his chair. Up close, the sheer physical density of him was overwhelming. He radiated a dry, aggressive heat. "The cut on your head," I said, looking at the sluggishly bleeding gash above his eyebrow. "It needs pressure, and probably stitches." "No doctors," he said flatly. He picked up the roll of gauze and held it out to me. "Clean it." I hesitated, then took the gauze. My fingers brushed his. His skin was rough, calloused, and alarmingly warm. I tore off a square of the cotton, folded it, and uncapped the rubbing alcohol myself. I tipped a modest amount onto the pad. "This is going to sting," I muttered. "Just do it." I leaned in. I had to brace my hand lightly against his temple to steady myself. The skin there was tight, the pulse beneath it beating with a steady, heavy rhythm. I pressed the alcohol-soaked pad to the cut. Gabriel hissed sharply through his teeth, his eyes sliding shut. His hands gripped the armrests of the chair, the knuckles turning white. "Sorry," I whispered automatically. "Stop apologizing," he ground out, not opening his eyes. "You say sorry like it's a reflex. Did Hayes train you to do that?" The casual cruelty of the question felt like a slap. My hand jerked, pressing harder against the wound. He grunted, his eyes snapping open to glare at me. But I didn't back down. "Declan didn't train me," I said, my voice hardening. "My mother did. She thought politeness was armor. If you're perfectly accommodating, nobody has a reason to hit you." I wiped away a streak of dried blood from his cheekbone. "It turns out they just hit you with contracts and NDAs instead." Gabriel watched my face, his dark eyes narrowing slightly. The irritation in his expression shifted, morphing into a cold, clinical curiosity. "He bought your father's debt," Gabriel stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes, $7 million. The wedding was the final contingency for the merger." I tossed the bloody gauze into a metal trash can and tore off a fresh piece. "If I don't go back, Declan pulls the funding. My father's company goes into receivership by the end of the week." "And you ran anyway?" I heard him talking on the phone. I stared at the fresh gauze in my hand, unable to meet his eyes. "He called me a golden retriever, an acquisition." I let out a dry, cracked laugh. I could handle the loveless marriage. I really thought I could. We were supposed to be partners in a transaction, but I wasn't a partner. I was livestock. Gabriel didn't say anything. He just watched me. The silence in the office grew heavy, thick with the unsaid. I reached for a strip of medical tape to secure the clean gauze over his brow. Suddenly, the stillness was shattered. From the cavernous space of the garage outside the office, the massive metal door rattled with a violent, deafening bang. Someone was hammering on the corrugated steel from the outside. Heavy, urgent strikes. Gabriel moved with terrifying speed. In a fraction of a second, the heavy black Glock was in his hand, snatched from the desk before I even registered his arm moving. He grabbed my wrist, his grip like a steel vise, and yanked me hard behind him, shoving me toward the narrow gap between the filing cabinet and the wall. "Get down!" he ordered, his voice barely a breath. "Do not make a sound." I collapsed into the tight space, my knees hitting the floor hard. The smell of old paper and rusted metal filled my nose. I clamped a hand over my mouth to smother my own ragged breathing. Through the glass wall of the office, I watched Gabriel kill the main overhead light, plunging the small room into shadows, illuminated only by the faint orange glow of the space heater. He moved to the edge of the glass, pressing himself against the frame, his gun angled toward the floor but ready. The hammering outside stopped. A metallic scrape echoed through the vast garage, followed by the electronic whine of the motorized track. The heavy door began to inch upward. A wedge of harsh, white streetlight sliced into the darkness, widening as the door rose. Heavy boots splashed in the puddles outside. "Gabe, it's Russo!" A voice echoed in the cavernous space. It was a thick, gravelly voice, edged with panic. Gabriel didn't lower his weapon immediately. He waited until a solitary, heavy-set silhouette ducked under the half-open door and stepped into the garage. The man was soaking wet, holding a large, dripping umbrella and breathing hard. Gabriel stepped out of the office, his footfalls entirely silent on the concrete. "You're supposed to be at the docks, Russo." The man jumped, spinning around. "Christ, Gabe, don't do that." Russo ran a hand over his balding head, shaking off the rain. "I came from the docks. We have a massive problem." "Speak." Gabriel's voice was a low, lethal hum. I pressed my face against the cold metal of the filing cabinet, straining to hear. The damp chill of the floor was seeping back into my bones. But the adrenaline burned hot in my veins. "The Port Authority locked down Pier 4, Russo said, pacing a tight circle in the grease. "Customs is tearing apart 3 of our shipping containers, the ones from Palermo. They're ripping the pallets apart with crowbars, boss. They've never pushed this hard without a warrant." Gabriel stood perfectly still. "Customs is paid for. We cleared those manifests yesterday." "Not anymore," Russo snapped. "Someone higher up squeezed the commissioner, hard. But that's not even the worst part." Russo stopped pacing and looked directly at Gabriel. "The cops are crawling all over the east side. They're locking down intersections, checking trunks. And they're looking for you." A suffocating tension instantly filled the garage. "Why?" Gabriel demanded. "Declan Hayes," Russo said, spitting the name onto the floor like a curse. He just held a press conference on the steps of the St. Regis. 5 news crews. He looked like he was about to cry, Gabe. It was a hell of a performance. "Get to the point, Russo." "He says his bride didn't run away. He says she was abducted from the hotel by the Costa family." My stomach plummeted. The world tilted violently on its axis, the dark corners of the office spinning around me. Abducted. "He's spinning a narrative," Russo continued, his voice rising in agitation. "He claims we took the girl to blackmail him into dropping the waterfront rezoning project. He's turning it into a crusade. He's got the whole city thinking you snatched an innocent woman on her wedding day. The mayor just gave the PD the green light to raid every property attached to your name until they find her." Gabriel didn't react. He stood in the shadows, a statue carved from granite. "They have no proof. They have traffic cams, Gabe," Russo yelled, throwing his arms up. "An armored Audi, registered to a shell company we own, was seen blowing a red light 3 blocks from the hotel, directly after the alleged kidnapping. The cops put 2 and 2 together." Russo took a step closer, lowering his voice to a frantic hiss. "We are bleeding money by the hour with the ports locked down. The capos are panicking. If Hayes pushes this, it's going to be a war we can't afford. We need to find the girl, Gabe. If we find her, we drop her at a police precinct, prove Hayes is a lying sack of shit, and clear the heat." I stopped breathing. My hand was clamped so tightly over my mouth that my lips were numb. Drop her at a police precinct. If they handed me to the police would hand me straight to Declan. Declan was a sitting city councilman. He owned the precinct captains. He would spin my return, claim I was traumatized, and lock me away in some private psychiatric facility until I signed the merger papers and played the obedient, traumatized wife. I would be buried alive under a mountain of PR and silk. "The girl is gone," Gabriel said smoothly. I blinked in the darkness. "What do you mean, gone?" Russo asked. "She ran into the alley. Leo saw her. But we didn't take her. She got into a cab. We drove off. It's a coincidence." Gabriel's voice was utterly flat, devoid of a single tremor of a lie. "Hayes is grasping at straws." "A cab?" Russo sounded doubtful. "You sure?" "I'm sure. Tell the capos to hold their nerve. Call our guy in the precinct. Tell him to demand the security footage from the alley. It will show her walking away on her own. There are no cameras in that alley, Gabe. They were smashed a week ago." "Exactly," Gabriel said softly. "No proof. Now go back to the docks. Keep the men quiet. I'll handle Hayes." Russo stared at Gabriel for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. But Gabe, if this goes south, the commission won't back you. You know that." "I know. Get out of here." Russo turned and jogged back out into the rain. The heavy metal door groaned downwards, slamming shut with a finality that made my teeth ache. Silence descended on the garage again. Gabriel stood out there for a full minute, just staring at the closed door. Then he turned on his heel and walked back into the office. He flicked the harsh overhead light back on. I flinched against the sudden brightness. He looked down at the narrow space where I was wedged between the wall and the filing cabinet. His face was a mask of dark, violent calculation. "You can come out now," he said. I uncoiled my stiff limbs, shivering uncontrollably as I stood up. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him, waiting for the executioner's block. "He's framing you," I finally whispered, my voice sounding thin and pathetic in the sterile light. "Declan, he's using my disappearance to destroy you and boost his own polling." "He's trying," Gabriel corrected. He walked over to the desk, ejecting the magazine from his Glock, checking the rounds with mechanical precision. Slamming it back in, he holstered the weapon. "He's a politician. He recognized a crisis and monetized it in under 3 hours. I'd respect the hustle if it wasn't costing me millions of dollars." "Why didn't you tell Russo I was here?" I asked. The question tasted like lead. "He's right. If you march me into a police station right now, you ruin Declan's narrative. You save your business." Gabriel leaned against the desk, crossing his arms over his bare, scarred chest. He looked at me, really looked at me, assessing the oversized t-shirt, the wet hair plastered to my skull, the sheer, unadulterated panic in my eyes. "Because," Gabriel said, his voice dropping an octave, taking on a rough, scraping texture, "if I hand you over to the cops, Hayes wins. He gets his golden retriever back, and I don't like politicians getting what they want." The smell of ozone from the space heater suddenly felt suffocating. I stared at Gabriel, trying to decipher the complex geometry of his logic. "You're risking a war with the police? Out of spite?" Gabriel let out a short, dark sound. "Spite is an excellent motivator, Chloe. It built half this city. But no, it's not just spite. It's leverage." He pushed off the desk and walked toward the small window that looked out into the cavernous, empty garage. He stood with his back to me, the muscles in his shoulders tight. "Right now, Hayes holds all the cards in the public eye," Gabriel said, not looking at me. "He's the grieving fiancé fighting the wicked Mafia. He's weaponizing the police force to raid my businesses, looking for you. If I surrender you to a precinct, who's waiting there to collect you?" "Declan," I answered, the realization turning my blood cold. "Exactly. The cops hand you over to him. He takes you home. He calls a private doctor to declare you mentally unfit due to trauma. He signs your father's merger, takes the money, and you spend the rest of your life heavily medicated in a townhouse in the Hamptons." Gabriel turned around, his dark eyes locking onto mine. "And he still blames me. He says I broke you. The raids continue. I lose either way." I felt a sudden, sickening wave of vertigo. Gabriel wasn't exaggerating. He had perfectly mapped out Declan's playbook. Declan didn't operate on passion, he operated on risk management. I was a volatile asset that needed to be secured and silenced. "So what do you do?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "Kill him?" Gabriel smiled. It was a terrible, razor-thin smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Assassinating a sitting city councilman is bad for business. The feds tend to frown on it. No, we don't kill him. We break his narrative." He walked slowly back toward me, stopping just a foot away. The heat radiating off his skin was tangible in the cold room. "Hayes built a house of cards on the premise that you are a helpless victim," Gabriel said, his voice low, almost intimate. "If you surface, and you aren't a victim, the house falls down." I frowned, confusion battling with the exhaustion dragging at my mind. "How?" "You're going to make a statement," Gabriel said. "Publicly. You're going to tell the world that you ran away voluntarily, that Hayes is a fraud who bought your family's debt to force a marriage, and that you fled because you discovered his corruption." I stared at him, my breath catching. "If I do that, he'll destroy my father. The debt, I will buy your father's debt," Gabriel interrupted seamlessly. The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible. "You... what?" "7 million is pocket change for my syndicate," Gabriel said, his tone as casual as if discussing the price of coffee. "I buy the debt from Hayes's holding company through a blind trust. Your father's business stays afloat. You get your freedom. In exchange, you become my wrecking ball. You expose Hayes. You clear my name. The cops back off my docks." I backed away slightly, hitting my shoulders against the metal filing cabinet. "You want me to go to the press and accuse a powerful politician of extortion and fraud. He'll bury me in defamation suits." "He can't sue you if you have proof," Gabriel countered, stepping into my space, boxing me in. "And I have the proof. I've been collecting dirt on his waterfront kickbacks for a year, waiting for the right moment to squeeze him." "You are the right moment." I looked up into his face. The bruised jaw, the stitched brow, the cold, calculating black eyes. He wasn't a savior. He was a predator who had just found a highly effective weapon. "You're using me," I whispered. "Yes," Gabriel agreed instantly, offering no apologies, no soft edges. "I'm using you to protect my empire. But unlike Hayes, I'm negotiating with you to your face. I'm not doing it behind your back in a bathroom. This is a transaction, Chloe. A very violent, very public transaction. But at the end of it, you walk away." "And if I refuse?" I asked. My chin jutted out in a pathetic display of defiance. "If I tell you to go to hell?" Gabriel didn't blink. "Then I put you in a cab, right now. I give you $500 and I wish you luck. You can run. But you won't get far before Hayes's private security or the police find you. And when they do, you belong to him." The reality of my situation crashed down on me, suffocating and absolute. I was trapped between a golden cage built on lies and a blood-stained empire built on violence. But Gabriel Costa was offering me the one thing Declan Hayes never would. A choice. I looked down at the borrowed, oversized t-shirt I was wearing. It smelled like smoke and survival. I thought of the Vera Wang dress lying in a ruined heap on the floor. I thought of Declan's nasal voice, a golden retriever in a pencil skirt. I looked back up at Gabriel. The fear was still there, cold and sharp in my chest, but beneath it, a tiny, hard ember of anger finally ignited. "You buy my father's debt first," I said, my voice dropping the tremble. "I want the digital transfer confirmation in my hand before I say a word to the press." Gabriel's eyes flared with a sudden, dark amusement. It was the first time I had seen a genuine expression on his face. He leaned in, his face inches from mine, the smell of rubbing alcohol and rain enveloping me. "Deal," he murmured. "Welcome to the mob, Miss Bishop. Now let's get out of here before the cops realize there aren't any cameras in that alley." Gabriel didn't offer me a hand to walk out of the office. He tossed a heavy black fleece jacket at my chest and killed the lights. We didn't take the flashy Audi that Leo had driven. Deep in the bowels of the garage, Hidden beneath a tarp that smelled of mildew and dust, sat a slate-grey Honda Accord. It was violently unremarkable. Gabriel popped the locks, sliding into the driver's seat with a suppressed groan that betrayed his battered ribs. I sank into the passenger side. The interior smelled like stale vanilla air freshener and old fast food. It was a jarring contrast to the bespoke leather of the Audi and the sterile, floral nightmare of the St. Regis bridal suite. Gabriel started the engine. It idled with a pathetic, uneven rattle. "Keep your head down until we clear the industrial zone," he ordered, checking his mirrors. "Cops will be running plates on anything leaving the area." I curled my knees to my chest, pulling the fleece tight around my shoulders. The fabric swallowed me whole. As we pulled out into the wet, unforgiving night, the rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a thick, oily fog that clung to the street lamps. I watched the blurred, neon reflections slide across the wet dashboard. My body was numb, entirely drained of adrenaline, leaving behind a hollow ache in my bones. We drove in complete silence for nearly an hour. Gabriel navigated the city's underbelly with a terrifying familiarity, taking service roads, unmarked alleys, and subterranean tunnels that bypassed the major intersections where police cruisers were undoubtedly setting up checkpoints. "Where are we going?" I finally asked. My voice sounded weak, scraping against the dry air of the heater. "A secondary location," he replied, his eyes never leaving the road. "Somewhere Hayes's private security doesn't know about, and the cops don't have warrants for. You need sleep. Tomorrow you have a lot of talking to do." We eventually merged onto the highway, heading north away from the dense cluster of skyscrapers toward the jagged cliffs that bordered the river. He pulled into the subterranean parking garage of a brutalist, concrete high-rise. There were no attendants, just a heavy steel gate that responded to a transponder in his glove box. We rode a private elevator up 20 floors. My ears popped. The doors slid open to reveal a space that felt less like an apartment and more like a high-end bunker. The floors were polished concrete, cold and unforgiving. The walls were mostly floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic, dizzying view of the city's glowing grid below. But the glass was thick. Bulletproof thick. The furniture was sparse, dark, and strictly functional. It smelled of citrus cleaner, cold leather, and the faint, bitter tang of gunpowder. Gabriel locked the deadbolt behind us. 3 separate mechanical clicks echoed in the cavernous foyer. "Guest room is down the hall. Second door on the left," he said, shrugging off his suit jacket and tossing it over the back of a black leather sofa. "There's a bathroom attached. Use the hot water. If you go into shock on me, this whole deal is off." He didn't wait for a response. He walked toward a sleek, dark wood kitchen island, pulled a bottle of amber liquid from a cabinet, and poured a generous measure into a heavy crystal glass. I stood in the foyer, my bare feet freezing against the polished concrete. I felt completely detached from my own body. Hours ago, I had been standing on a plush carpet, having a veil pinned to my scalp by women who secretly hated me. Now, I was standing in a Mafia safe house, wearing a mob boss's sweatpants, about to burn my own life to the ground. I found the guest room. It was stark white and smelled like nothing at all. I stepped into the attached bathroom, peeling off the damp, oversized clothes. The mirror above the sink was merciless. My hair was a stiff, tangled rat's nest of dried rain, hairspray, and bobby pins. My mascara had run, leaving dark, bruised-looking circles under my eyes. There was a smear of Gabriel's blood on my collarbone from when I had leaned against him in the garage. I turned the shower on, letting the water run until the glass fogged over. Stepping under the scalding spray, I finally let out a breath that I felt like I had been holding for 2 years. The water washed away the dirt, the dried blood, and the heavy foundation my mother had insisted upon. The water swirling down the stainless steel drain ran brown, then pink, then clear. I scrubbed my skin until it was raw, trying to scrub away the lingering scent of lilies and the phantom pressure of Declan's hands on my waist. When I stepped out, wrapped in a thick, abrasive white towel, I felt entirely hollowed out. I crawled into the perfectly made, excessively firm bed. I expected to lay awake, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the catastrophic mess I had made. But my brain simply shut down. I fell into a heavy, dreamless oblivion before the city lights even had a chance to filter through the blinds. I woke up to the smell of strong espresso and burnt toast. The digital clock on the nightstand read 9:14 a.m. The fog from last night had burned off, replaced by a harsh, blinding morning sun that flooded the bedroom. I sat up, my muscles screaming in protest. My scraped knee was stiff and throbbing. I found a pair of black cotton scrubs folded neatly on the foot of the bed, likely dropped off by someone while I was dead to the world. They were still too big, but they were clean. I walked out into the main living area. Gabriel was sitting at the kitchen island. He was wearing a fresh white Henley, the sleeves pushed up to reveal the dense ink of his tattoos. The bruising on his face had settled into a vivid, ugly spectrum of purple and yellow, and the cut over his eye was sealed with butterfly bandages. He didn't look up from the sleek silver laptop in front of him. "Coffee's in the pot," he said, his voice a low gravel rumble. "Drink it black. We don't have milk." I walked behind the island and poured myself a mug. My hands were shaking slightly. The ceramic was warm against my palms. I took a sip. It was thick, bitter, and tasted aggressively like survival. I walked around to his side of the island and stood there. Gabriel finished whatever he was reading, closed the laptop with a quiet snap, and turned it toward me. He tapped the trackpad to wake the screen. "Look," he commanded. I set my mug down and looked. It was a secure banking portal. The screen displayed a confirmed wire transfer confirmation. The amount was $7,250,000. The sender was listed as a holding company I didn't recognize. The recipient was Bishop Real Estate Developments, my father's corporate account. "It cleared 20 minutes ago," Gabriel said, leaning back in his stool, watching my face. "Your father's debt to Hayes is wiped clean. He owns his company free and clear. If Hayes tries to leverage him today, he'll find out the paper is worthless." I stared at the zeros on the screen. The heavy, suffocating weight that had sat on my chest for 6 months, the guilt of my father's impending bankruptcy, the absolute obligation to marry a man I despised, evaporated. It was just gone, replaced by a terrifying, untethered freedom. "You actually did it," I whispered. "I told you I would," Gabriel replied flatly. He reached to his left and slid a thick, manila envelope across the marble counter. It stopped inches from my hand. "My end is complete. Now, you hold up yours." I picked up the envelope. It was heavy. I unwound the red string closure and dumped the contents onto the counter. Photographs, bank statements, copies of encrypted emails. I picked up the top document. It was a ledger. Beside it was a grainy photograph of Declan sitting in a dark booth at a steakhouse, handing a thick envelope to a man wearing a Port Authority uniform. "Hayes championed the Waterfront Revitalization Act," Gabriel explained, his tone shifting into the detached cadence of a boardroom presentation. He publicly decried the industrial blight. What he didn't say was that he had a shell company systematically buying up the condemned lots for pennies on the dollar. He used the zoning board to reclassify the land, tripling its value overnight. Then he awarded the development contracts to a firm owned by his brother-in-law, I sifted through the papers. The sheer volume of the corruption was staggering. Dates, times, offshore account numbers. He's been taking kickbacks to expedite permits, Gabriel continued. And he's been using the police to harass the dock workers' unions that push back against his contractors. That's where we clashed. He tried to squeeze my territory, demanding a cut of the import logistics. I told him no. This whole abducted bride narrative is his way of deploying the NYPD to dismantle my infrastructure out of spite. I picked up an email printout. It was from Declan to his campaign manager, dated 3 months ago. Keep the Bishop girl visible but silent. The optics of saving her father's legacy play beautifully with the blue-collar demographic. Schedule the wedding a month before the primary. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. I wasn't just a golden retriever. I was a prop, a meticulously calculated campaign expense. I looked up at Gabriel. He was watching me intently, his dark eyes unreadable. He wasn't offering sympathy. He was waiting to see if I was going to shatter. "He's a monster," I said, my voice steadying. "He's a politician," Gabriel corrected dryly. "The two are frequently indistinguishable. The question is, are you ready to burn him to the ground?" I looked back down at the ledger. I thought about the string quartet. I thought about the corset digging into my ribs and the suffocating scent of lilies. "Yes," I said. "How do we do it?" "We didn't call a press conference. If we invite the press, Hayes's people will catch wind of it," Gabriel explained, pacing the length of the living room. "He has the police chief on speed dial. They'll raid the location before you can even open your mouth, drag you out in handcuffs for your own safety, and confiscate the evidence." "So we go directly to the public," I said, the caffeine finally hitting my bloodstream. "Exactly." Gabriel pulled his phone out and sent a rapid-fire text. "I have a contact, an independent investigative journalist. He hates Hayes more than I do. He's been trying to nail him for years, but never had the paper trail. We give him the exclusive, on the condition that we live-stream the interview directly from here." "A live-stream," I repeated. "Uncut, unedited, no way for Hayes's PR team to spin it or censor it," Gabriel said. "Once it's on the internet, it's everywhere. The major networks will be forced to pick it up within minutes." An hour later, the secure elevator chimed. Gabriel stood by the door, his hand resting casually inside his jacket, near the holster. A scrawny man with wire-rimmed glasses, a messenger bag and a tripod walked in, escorted by Russo. The man looked terrified. He took one look at Gabriel, swallowed hard, and then his eyes landed on me. "Holy shit," the journalist breathed. "You're Chloe Bishop. The news said you were kidnapped by the Costa family." "I know," I said, stepping forward. I didn't smile. "I wasn't. Set up your camera." The journalist, his name was Miller, didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled to set up a high-definition camera and a ring light in the center of the living room. He connected a labyrinth of cables to his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard to establish a secure, encrypted stream. "I need to prep you," Gabriel said, pulling me aside toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city spread out below us, completely unaware of the bomb we were about to drop. "I know what to say," I told him, clutching the manila folder against my chest. "Don't try to look composed," Gabriel said, his dark eyes scanning my face. He reached out, his thumb brushing lightly against the dark circle under my eye. The touch was startlingly gentle, a stark contrast to the violence etched into his knuckles. "Let them see the exhaustion. Let them see the mess. Hayes is trying to paint you as a fragile victim. If you go on camera looking like a polished debutante, they won't believe you. But if you look like a woman who just clawed her way out of a trap, they'll listen to every word." I nodded slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. Stream is live in 30 seconds, Miller called out, his voice squeaking slightly. I've blasted the link to my entire subscriber base and tipped off the news desks at Channel 4 and 7. They're already logging on. I walked over to the single leather armchair they had positioned in front of the camera. I sat down. The ring light was blinding. I felt utterly exposed. 10 seconds, Miller said. Gabriel stepped back into the shadows, out of the camera's view, leaning against the concrete pillar. He met my eyes and gave a single, slow nod. You're live. I stared into the black lens. The silence in the room was absolute. My name is Chloe Bishop, I started. My voice shook on the first syllable, but I forced my jaw tight and pushed through it. Yesterday, my fiancé, City Councilman Declan Hayes, held a press conference claiming I was abducted from our wedding by organized crime. He is lying. I took a breath. The air felt thin. I wasn't kidnapped. I ran. I ran because 30 minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, I discovered that my marriage wasn't a partnership. It was a hostile takeover. Declan Hayes bought $7 million of my father's corporate debt, using a shell company, to force me into a marriage that would benefit his polling numbers. I opened the manila folder. I held up the printed emails. I held up the ledger. I ran because Declan Hayes is a fraud. He has been taking kickbacks from waterfront developers. He has weaponized the zoning board to enrich his family. The documents I hold in my hand prove a systematic pattern of extortion, bribery, and political corruption. He didn't invent a kidnapping because he loves me. He invented a kidnapping to use the police force as his private army to hunt down the people he owes money to. I looked directly into the lens, imagining Declan's face staring back at me from a monitor in his polished mahogany office. I am not a victim, Declan, I said, the anger finally bleeding into my tone, cold and sharp. And I am not a hostage. You built a career on lies. I'm just the one turning on the lights. I lowered the papers. I looked at Miller. Cut the feed. Miller hit a key. The red light on the camera blinked out. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat in the chair, my hands trembling violently, my chest heaving. I had just declared war on one of the most powerful men in the city. I had detonated my own life on live television. From the shadows, I heard the clinking of glass. Gabriel walked forward. He held out a heavy crystal tumbler filled with amber liquid. I took it, my fingers brushing his calloused knuckles. The whiskey burned my throat, a sharp, necessary fire. Gabriel raised his own glass, the bruised corner of his mouth ticking upward into a dangerous, authentic smile. To burning houses, Chloe. The match has been struck, and the fire is spreading. Chloe didn't just escape the altar. She just took a sledgehammer to Declan's entire political empire on live television. But when you corner a desperate, powerful man, he doesn't just surrender. He fights dirty. What will Declan do now that his golden retriever has bared her teeth? And is Gabriel keeping Chloe around for protection, or is the Mafia boss starting to see her as more than just leverage? If you are living for this ruthless revenge, smash that like button, share with your friends, and hit subscribe. Ring the bell so you don't miss the next story, where the fallout gets deadly. Tell us in the comments, was the live stream a genius move or a fatal mistake? See you next time.